You can feed a stadium with logistics, budgets, and trucks. But that was not the problem on that Galilean hillside. The problem was time collapsing, daylight thinning, and a crowd that had walked itself into hunger without a plan. And then something unexpected happened. The story that follows is not a soft parable invented for comfort. It is one of the most repeated scenes in early Christian memory, preserved in 4 separate gospel accounts with different camera angles and different anxieties, yet the same spine. A teacher, a sea, a crowd too large to pretend away. A meal that should not have existed on paper. At the time, no one realized how far this moment would travel, copied into preaching and parchment, argued over in kitchens and synagogues and lecture halls, painted onto walls, sung until the extraordinary risk-sounding routine. But that was not the real turning point. The real tension sits earlier, where compassion meets arithmetic and refuses to lose. Picture the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, a bowl of hills and heat, dust clinging to robes, voices overlapping like surf, the water's blue-green shimmer cutting a clean line against stone and scrub. The Galilean countryside was not a place where you solved hunger with abstract abundance. Villages sat like scattered beads along the shoreline and up into the hills. Bread was not a slogan. It was labor, grain, grinding, fire, and time. When the text says evening approached, it is not only atmosphere. It is the edge of a day when bodies speak louder than speeches. Jesus of Nazareth had withdrawn by boat, seeking space after violence and grief. The Gospels connect this withdrawal to the execution of John the Baptist under Herod Antipas, a political killing that would have sent tremors through any movement built on prophetic hope. Fear did not stay politely off stage. It surged through the region like weather. The crowds did not respect the retreat. They ran along the shore on foot, a human river pouring toward the same lonely place, drawn by rumor of healing and teaching, by the magnetic pull of a man who seemed to carry daylight in his voice. The shore was never silent for long. Fishing nets, trade talk, administration in the background, small boats tilting on the water. When the crowd arrived, the solitude Jesus sought collapsed into public presence. That collapse is not a footnote. It is the human cost of visibility. A teacher cannot speak to thousands without becoming responsible for what happens when words end and bodies remain. He welcomed them. He spoke about the kingdom of God. He restored bodies the world had written off. Hours vanished. Shadows lengthened. Stomachs tightened, and the body began to insist on what the mind tries not to name in public. The disciples surfaced the obvious solution, the one every sensible person would choose. Send them away. Let them buy food in the villages. Translate need into someone else's marketplace. It was practical. It was also a way to make the problem disappear over the horizon. Jesus refused the disappearance. He turned the obligation back toward his inner circle with a sentence that must have landed like a stone in still water. You give them something to eat. Philip, in John's telling, does the math out loud, almost like a defense attorney building a case for impossibility. Andrew scans the edges and finds a boy with barley loaves and small fish, a lunch sized for one life, not thousands. Barley bread was common food in the ancient Levant, often associated with ordinary life rather than luxury, which makes the detail feel grounded even as the scene strains toward the extraordinary. What came next was even more significant than the headcount. In the narrative world of the Gospels, Jesus takes what is laughably small, gives thanks, breaks it, and distributes it. The verbs are simple: look up, bless, break, give. In the narrative world of first-century Jewish Palestine, that sequence resembles table gratitude before a meal, even when the meal should be impossible. The text does not slow down to explain physics. It moves like an eyewitness who is still stunned by sequence, not formula. That pacing is part of the scene's power. It refuses to argue you into calm. It drags you through motion. Mark's account adds a strangely human detail. The crowd sitting on green grass in orderly groups, hundreds and fifties, as if the scene is both miracle and organization, chaos and care. But that was not the end of the narrative surprises. Bread passes, fish passes. The hungry eat until the hunger itself becomes a kind of silence. The scene ends with fragments collected, 12 baskets of leftovers in several accounts, a detail that reads less like a tidy flourish and more like a deliberate echo of Israel's 12-tribe identity. A claim soaked in symbol. Matthew adds a detail easy to miss in the rush. 5,000 counted were men, not counting women and children, which means the silent majority of the crowd is erased from the number line even as they are present in the pressure and the need. John places the episode near Passover, a time frame that invites readers to hear echoes of deliverance and wilderness provision without turning the text into a coded equation. The text does not pause to give a census. It gives you a feeling, a hillside swelling with people who have left their fields and their nets and their small certainties behind. The disciples are not villains in this scene. They are realists. They are trying to manage a public moment that has already slipped beyond control. And then something unexpected happened once the teacher refused the easiest exit. Hunger stopped being a private problem individuals could solve alone. It became a shared crisis that demanded a shared solution. Matthew and Mark sit close together in narrative structure, while Luke retells the episode with a storyteller's attention to the kingdom's urgency. John adds proper names and geography, placing the crowd near the Sea of Tiberias, naming the logistics of the problem in a way that makes the tension feel blunt and financial. None of the accounts treat the moment as a quiet meditation. The scene is crowded, noisy, pressed together by need. That is part of why the story survives as a cultural hinge. It refuses to let the crowd become scenery, because modern readers cannot replay the first century. Honesty requires naming limits. Archaeology illuminates the world of Galilee, not the private details of a single afternoon. Textual study can trace how stories traveled and changed emphasis, yet it cannot settle every question believers and skeptics ask. What remains stable is the narrative's core claim repeated in multiple sources. The teacher's circle witnessed something that reordered their understanding of provision itself. That claim is not a tidy lesson about budgeting. It is a collision between expectation and what the text describes as divine generosity. Historians do not grant cameras to the first century. What they can say with confidence is that this story mattered enough to be written early, repeated widely, and woven into the identity of a movement that would eventually span empires. Multiple independent attestation across sources is part of why the episode sits so central in scholarship's map of Jesus' tradition, even when scholars disagree sharply about what happened on the ground. Some readers hear pure miracle, others hear compressed community ethics. Still others hear a staged symbol meant to teach generosity under impossible odds. The sources do not hand us a laboratory receipt. They hand us witnesses arguing with hunger across the page. Luke's version keeps the emotional temperature high by pairing compassion with constraint, as if the story is always asking what you do when the need is larger than your toolkit. The emotional stakes are not only spiritual, they are social. A crowd that eats together is a crowd that has been given a reason to stay. A crowd that is sent away carries hunger back into houses and rumors back into villages. The Gospels keep pressing the reader toward the harder outcome: presence, responsibility. Food in hand, leftovers that embarrass the arithmetic. The story also survives because it is memorable in the plain sense. It has food, numbers, conflict, and a reversal. It has a teacher who does not meet fear with a spreadsheet. It has disciples who look like people you know. People who want a reasonable plan when the world becomes unreasonable. That is why the scene keeps translating across cultures. It is not only theology, it is human pressure rendered in spare, concrete images. But that was not the real turning point for John's narrative. What happened next changed everything in that gospel, where the feeding becomes a sign that detonates a long public argument about bread that is more than bread. The text pushes into sharp controversy, metaphor colliding with appetite, crowd splintering, a teacher refusing to be reduced to a meal ticket. The controversy that follows does not erase the feeding, it deepens it. The crowd chases meaning. The discourse turns sharp. Words like bread and life and witness become charged with public risk. The emotional contrast is almost cinematic. Calm distribution on a hillside, then sharper conflict in the streets, then the night, sea, and wind. The narrative rhythm keeps pulling you from fullness into peril, from satisfaction into fear, as if the story refuses to let anyone mistake the miracle for a private party. In the same broader sequence, John also narrates a night crossing on the sea and a storm, material that overlaps with other gospels and tightens the episode's dramatic pressure, as if the miracle on land is followed by danger on water. But that was not the end. The feeding scene would be quoted across centuries, illustrated, debated, and carried in liturgy until it became a template for how communities remember generosity under pressure. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, like the video and subscribe for more weekly breakdowns. Even if you stay strictly with the feeding scene, the emotional arc is already complete in miniature. Grief at the edge of the frame, crowds pressing in, disciples caught between faith and arithmetic. A moment where scarcity meets a command that sounds unfair until it becomes unforgettable. The miracle, as tradition tells it, is not only multiplication, it is the insistence that no one should be sent away empty when the world tries to outsource compassion. The hills go quiet again. The baskets remain heavy with meaning, light with crumbs. A story still being told wherever people gather and wonder what can come from almost nothing when someone gives thanks and begins to break bread. The wind off the water would have carried voices farther than any stage. Generations later, the retellings would still multiply. Paintings would freeze the same motion. Sermons would return to the same hillside because hunger never quite leaves the human story behind, or the hope across centuries.